Hey everybody, back again for another video. I just wanted to talk about today the interview with Mike Huckabee and Tucker Carlson. And I watched the Nick Fuentes video about this last night. I stayed up late because I said I was lazy and wasn't paying attention to the news. So I stayed up last night, got into it, because procrastination catches up to you like that. So that's what I did. And, I was very intrigued, so I wanted to go see this interview for myself and see if it was actually as bad as Nick was talking about, and it was worse. This was one of the most devastating things I've seen in a long time. You know, I don't really watch Tucker Carlson frequently, but he killed this guy. He crushed it. He brought up and challenged some questions that, a lot of people don't have the balls to do that, and so I really appreciate him doing that. And this interview's been taken down. They've tried to take this interview down, so it was hard for me to find, even though it was literally just the other day, right? So who is Mike Huckabee? Mike Huckabee is the U.S. ambassador to Israel, okay? He is, in charge of different diplomatic relations between the two countries, right? And several arguments are brought up here. So Mike Huckabee is a, Christian Zionist, okay? Christian Zionist. And you guys already know my opinions about that, okay? He is a Zionist revisionist or whatever. He's like a radical Zionist. He has an idolatry view towards Israel. He essentially worships Israel, right? Not only as a country, but as a people, from a religious point of view, a biblical point of view, and like, he agrees with the stuff in the Talmud. He agrees with the stuff in the Jewish Bible. He agrees with, all of this stuff, right? About Israel's right to their land and so forth, the Jews' right to their land. And so Tucker asks him about this. He says, if you're a Christian Zionist and you're an American ambassador, then, what do you think about what Israel is doing, to these other countries in the Middle East? What's going on with Iran? What are their plans, right? And so, he tries to argue from a legal perspective, that there's laws protecting them and that they, have the right to be doing these things. And Tucker brings up the fact that they are constantly breaking these laws that are in place, right? And so, Mike Huckabee doesn't really have an argument to defend himself in this case, right? So, because he knows Tucker's right, and he doesn't really know. So what does he do? He goes back to the age-old argument about, from the biblical times, God promised the Jews this land, right? And so he brings up the whole Bible thing and how in Genesis, God promised this land, this parcel of land to Israel. And Mike Huckabee also argues that, the Jews have some sort of role in the end of the world, and so we have to look at them as greater than us, and all of these things that we see with traditional radical Zionists, right? And so Tucker, once again, challenges this argument, the age-old argument. He says, well, if you're going to argue that, let's go look at the Bible and see what it really says about this, because you're right, and I want to talk about it. And so they bring up Genesis, and it says specifically the land that they are entitled to, right? That they are entitled to by God, okay? They have the right to everything in between the Nile and the Euphrates River, okay? Which is essentially all of the Middle East. And, for decades, Israel has been trying to deny, and America has been trying to deny, that Israel's plan isn't to take over the entire Middle East, right? Because they're just protecting their own country from terrorist organizations, right? So we have to desecrate all of these hospitals, bomb, people's homes, bomb all of these buildings and all of these civilians, for their protection, right? Well, one, that's breaking a ton of laws, and two, now you've brought up the biblical argument, right? You've brought up the argument that God promised you this land. So wouldn't you say that, your guys' grander plan is to take over all of this territory? And what does Mike Huckabee say? He says, well, yes, that is the plan. And so, but then he quickly says, but we're not gonna do that right now. Like, that's not our plan. We don't have that in mind. Like, don't worry, that's not what we're gonna do. And so Tucker's like, well, you just basically fucking admitted that that is your grand plan, you know. And so what do we see here? We see for the first time in forever, Israel's grand plan is literally exposed into the wide open, okay? And they've been trying to deny this for the longest time, but this argument has finally been beaten, and it's finally out in the open. And not only is it Israel, that's admitting this, but it's the U.S. ambassador to Israel that is admitting, their grand plan. So we have a radical Zionist, Israel Zionist person working for our government that favors Israel's nationalist plans, and yet it's still taboo to talk about America's nationalist plans in fucking America, like us taking over the Western Hemisphere and such, which I agree with. However, if we're allied with Israel, then them taking over the Middle East goes directly against, what's good for America, right? And this is all our ambassador to Israel is saying that this is their plan, this is what they want to do. And yet, we are still supporting them. We have literally half of our Air Force personnel, planes, all of our bombers and stuff over in the Middle East right now, ready to go to war with Iran for Israel. Okay? So my question is, where does it end? We've already done this with Iraq. We're doing it with Iran now, right? And so, where does it end? Are we going to support you until you take over fucking Egypt, all of these other countries in the Middle East? Because I sure as hell don't want to live in America if that's the case. Like, my family is from Egypt, okay? Like, really? That's what the grand plan is? So, yeah, where does it end is my point here. And so, what's the reaction to this interview, right? Because you basically just admitted that you want to destroy and take over all of these Muslim, ran countries, right? So all of these countries now condemn the U.S. ambassador to Israel, right? They don't like what this guy said, and so now things are getting even more stirred up between all the countries in the Middle East and America, right? You have all of these countries now turning even more against America because of this, because of what's going on, because they see this guy, right, as an American person, right? They don't see him as an Israeli person, that has the interests for Israel. They see this guy as a person working for America. So what does that make us look like, right? That literally just makes us look like Israel's bitch. We're doing their bidding until it's done, And so I don't think it's going to stop with Iran, no matter how badly it goes. If it goes bad, I don't think it's going to stop there, unless we sever ties with Israel eventually. Then that's where it will end. But, for now, that's all I wanted to say about it. Peace.